On this channel, I teach you the real English British people actually use every day. Not textbook English, not robotic English, not English that sounds like it was written by AI in 2004, but real British English. And today, we're going to talk about something that causes a huge amount of stress for English learners, immigrants, international students, and professionals working in English-speaking environments. We're talking about professional emails because writing emails in English is not just about grammar. It's about tone, it's about culture, it's about social expectations, and in Britain especially, it's also about politeness, indirectness, and emotional balance. Sometimes people write emails that are grammatically perfect, but they still sound rude. And other times, people sound so formal, they accidentally sound cold, distant, or slightly strange. So in this lesson, I'm going to teach you how British people actually write professional emails, how to sound polite without sounding robotic. That was my robot impression. I always go to C3PO when I do this. Oh my. Common mistakes that learners make and the hidden cultural rules behind British email communication. And if you'd like even more help with British English, there is a free PDF that you can download in the description below. And please remember to like and hype this lesson as it really helps the channel to grow. Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to English Right Now. My name is British English teacher Roy. Well, it's Roy, but on YouTube, I'm known as British English teacher Roy. And I teach you the real British English that native speakers use every day. And today, we're looking at professional emails. So let's begin. One of the biggest mistakes English learners make is believing that a professional email means being extremely formal English. So people, they write like this, a little bit like Downton Abbey. Again, I'm halfway between Downton Abbey and C3PO. Dear Sir or Madam, I hope this electronic correspondence finds you in excellent health and high spirits. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit. I hope this email or this correspondence finds you in excellent health and high spirits. Now, technically, I hope this correspondence finds you in excellent health and high spirits isn't technically wrong. But in modern Britain, well, it sounds unbelievably formal. It sounds like you were writing to the Queen, to Queen Victoria. And I'm sure she would have loved an email that was written like that, but these days, it's not quite the same. British professional English today is usually polite, soft, clear, and surprisingly human. Professional does not mean C3PO. It does not mean robotic. And honestly, if your email sounds too formal nowadays, it actually creates more problems, or it can create more problems than anything else. It can create distance instead. British people often prefer warmth combined with politeness. So we've got the general idea, the big mistake out of the way, but let's talk about the opening. Let's begin with greetings. If you know the person's name, you could start with, "Hi Sarah," "Hello James," "Good morning Emma," all completely normal. Now, some learners panic and think, isn't hi too informal? Well, no. In modern British workplaces, hi is extremely common, even between managers, even in fairly professional environments. It's just another way of saying hello, although hello is possibly slightly more formal. But if you know the person's name, you can say hi. In fact, in jobs where I've worked in offices, people have emailed me, and they said, "Hi Roy," and I've replied back, "Hi Sarah," or whatever their name was. And what happens if you do know the name of the person, but you don't know them? For example, maybe you've never met this person, or you met them very briefly and you don't feel like you have the relationship that you do with Sarah and Jim and all the rest. Well, in that case, you could refer to that person as Mr. plus their surname, or Ms. MS plus their surname as well, depending on whether they're male or female. I've done a whole lesson about titles, but simply put, if you don't know me, or if you're at a company and I'm your customer, you might start off by saying, "Dear Mr. Woodhouse." You use my title and my surname. And then when I reply, you can take your lead from what I reply. So, for example, I might say at the end, "Thanks, Roy." From that point on, you could start saying, "Hi, Roy," or "Hello, Roy," and so on, because I've kind of given you permission to use my first name by using it in my sign-off in my reply. Now, that's if you know somebody's name. If you don't know the person's name, you could say, "Dear Sir or Madam." But honestly, this is becoming a little less common. Especially that word madam can really rile people up. Sometimes instead we may say, to whom it may concern. If you're writing maybe a letter of complaint, you might write, to whom it may concern, or to the head of this department. So, to the head of marketing, or for the attention of the head of marketing. However, in a kind of standard professional email, people often prefer hello, or good morning, or good afternoon. Good evening would be a bit weird if you're writing at that time. Depends on the situation, and it depends what message is coming next. And here is something very important culturally. British emails often begin softly. So instead of immediately asking for something, getting straight down to business, we don't always like that, people frequently add a small buffer. Hi there. I hope you're well. I hope you had a nice weekend. I hope your week is going well. These kind of things. I hope. Hi Sarah. I hope you're well. I hope you had a nice weekend. Now, this confuses some learners because they think, do British people genuinely care? Well, sometimes, yes, but sometimes it's simply social lubrication. It creates warmth before maybe a request. It's adding a little bit of humanity. It's adding that level of warmth. It's showing that I don't have to get straight down to business. I'm not all business. Now, this may seem a bit counterintuitive, not getting straight down to business, but we like this kind of softening phrase. It's really important in British culture. Think of it a bit like small talk. So, small talk is kind of this thing that we start off with to show that we're cool, and then we build into bigger conversations. It's the same idea. Greeting, little softening phrase, and then we get to business. It shows that we're not all about business, even though technically, we are trying to conduct business. So that level of warmth is really important. So we've got the start out of the way, and now let's move on to British indirectness. This is where things become very British. British people often avoid sounding too direct in emails. For example, instead of saying, send me the document today, that could sound really rude, a British person may say, would it be possible to send the document today? Or, when you have a moment, could you send the document over, please? Or even, I was wondering if you might be able to send the document today, although that's quite a lot of words there. Now, to many cultures, this sounds like it's not a request. When you have a moment, sounds like no pressure. It sounds like I'm saying the thing is almost unnecessary, but in Britain, softening language helps to maintain social harmony. Just because it doesn't sound like a request doesn't mean it's not a request. The important thing is send the document. The rest is kind of fluff to maintain that social harmony. And especially in professional communication, we like to maintain social harmony. British people often try to reduce what linguists refer to as face threat. In other words, they try to avoid sounding too demanding, aggressive, or confrontational, or putting too much pressure on that other person. But it doesn't mean the pressure isn't there. Look for the meat of the sentence. Would you mind sending the document? Send the document. That's the meat. And this is one reason why British emails can sound pretty vague to international workers. But look for the important information. Now let me give you some extremely useful professional British email phrases. Instead of I want. Sometimes we say to children, I want doesn't get. We would say instead, I was wondering if. Would it be possible to? Or I'd really appreciate it if. Instead of, you didn't send this, try, I noticed this may not have come through yet. Still says the same thing, it has not come through yet, but we're giving you the chance to do the right thing. Instead of saying, this is wrong, try, I think there may have been a small misunderstanding. Or the very British, that's not exactly what I was looking for. In other words, it's completely wrong, but we just say it in a different way. Context is key, but understanding the fact that we don't always use word for word the literal words you'd imagine. Saying that's not quite what I was looking for basically means that something has gone terribly wrong and this is far from what I wanted. This is the polar opposite of what I wanted, but politely. Now let's talk about mistakes. One mistake is sounding too demanding. For example, reply quickly. Even with a please reply quickly, it sounds too demanding. Send this today. I need this now. In some cultures, those expressions, they may sound efficient, but in British English, it can sound pretty abrupt. Another mistake is overusing formal vocabulary. Words like kindly, respected sir, esteemed colleague, or honourable, these are often much more common in other English speaking cultures around the world than in modern Britain. Now, these expressions may be something you've learned to show respect to British people, but they're not really that common in modern Britain. British professional English today tends to prefer simple, clear, friendly language. Now, another mistake is writing emails that are far too long. We are not writing a book. British people generally appreciate concise communication, polite but efficient. Not 3 paragraphs of unnecessary explanation, followed by a dramatic conclusion, followed by a bit of your life story. People are busy. And one of the biggest shocks that I find for students, certainly from certain countries, is the length of our sentences. We often prefer shorter, punchy sentences, so shorter emails and shorter sentences. Some cultures, they can show real kind of structure and linguistic perfection through these long, winding sentences. But in British English, we just prefer sentence, full stop, sentence, full stop. It gets the job done. So here's a very natural British professional email structure. We have the greeting, a small, warm opening, the reason for writing, polite request or information, a soft ending, and sign off. Simple. For example, hi Sarah, I hope you're well. I was just wondering if you'd had a chance to look at the report from last week. No rush, but I'd appreciate any updates when you have a moment. Many thanks, Roy. Notice, soft language, indirectness, warmth, no aggression. That sounds very natural in Britain. And now let's talk about endings. This is really important. Kind regards, warm regards, many thanks, they're all pretty common in British English. There's a whole funny thing about the fact that when it goes from warm regards to just regards, it shows that the British person is annoyed. Honestly, if a British person ends an email with regards, they're possibly not the happiest they've ever been with you. British people tend to love many thanks. I see it all the time, potentially as well, cheers, but honestly, we use many thanks a lot. And one thing learners often ask is, what's the difference between yours sincerely and yours faithfully? Well, technically, yours sincerely when you know the person's name and yours faithfully when you don't. But honestly, outside of very formal, official communication, maybe even formal legal communication, most people barely think about this anymore, and I rarely see it used. Modern British email culture is becoming more relaxed. And here's a little bonus about emails versus messages. This is something fascinating culturally. British communication changes dramatically depending on the platform. An email may sound softer, more structured, more diplomatic, whereas maybe a WhatsApp message or a Teams message may sound much shorter. Hi mate, just sent it over. Cheers. Perfect. Thanks. Understanding the difference is part of understanding real British communication. And I've done a whole lesson on WhatsApp etiquette. I'll link it down in the description below. But here's the real secret. Professional British emails are not about sounding intelligent, using your most complicated structures and words with these winding sentences. They're about making the other person feel comfortable. That's actually one of the deepest values inside British communication, reducing tension, reducing awkwardness, and avoiding social friction, even when discussing problems. That's why British people often soften criticism, apologize constantly, even when we're not actually apologizing. We add indirect language and avoid sounding emotionally intense, even professionally. So hopefully now you understand that writing professional emails in British English is not really about using complicated vocabulary. It's about tone, emotional intelligence, politeness, clarity, and cultural awareness. And honestly, once you understand the hidden psychology behind British communication, professional English becomes much easier. Now tell me in the comments, what's the strangest professional email you've ever received in English? There's also that free PDF in the description below, and please do remember to like and hype the lesson. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.